A quick disclaimer before we begin. I know it pisses off some old school fans that I use anything other than Star Wars to refer to this film, but I have no desire to confuse people as to what I'm talking about specifically, and since the whole franchise has adopted the name of Star Wars into the title of most of the other films, I think it's only fair to use its official name as given by Lucas. Plus, Lucas had toyed with the idea of putting in an episode number in the title originally, but Fox rightly claimed this would just confuse people until more sequels came out. So for simplicity's sake, I will refer to this film as the original film, Episode 4, or A New Hope. I've never fully gotten behind the comment, "It's just a movie." Sure, I use it to remind myself about succumbing to the most negative of reactions and becoming toxic, spreading my hatred of a movie to others and being intrusive in unrelated conversations. But what about the films that truly struck a chord with me and impacted my life in a positive way? Is there something inherently wrong if someone puts K-pop Demon Hunters as their favorite film and it inspires them out of personal hardships? What about the people who saw Jaws and decided they wanted to become filmmakers? To say Star Wars inspired me is not only an understatement, but almost a cliche. I know so many others who were also influenced by the series, both professionally and personally. I don't think I need to reiterate all the breakthroughs in the filmmaking business the original film was the catalyst for, or discuss the legion of fans who cite it as the greatest film of all time and seem to actively tear apart subsequent entries to the point where it splits the fandom. You are likely very aware of all of this, so let's skip the pretense and jump right into the production history of the film. Given the original film's status as legendary, it's no surprise that separating fact from fiction about its origins can amount to a full-time job. Some of it is our own fault, promoting apocryphal tales we've heard. Some of it is because the original film's production was a nightmare that took place almost 50 years ago, some misremembering and conflating multiple stories. But I attribute a great portion of the blame upon George Lucas himself, who often gives contradictory reflective interviews that don't match up with the historical records we have. That's not an accusation that he's lying, more so that he prefers to remember and interpret history in a different way than the naked facts might suggest. For example, the original title of Episode 6. Lucas suggested Return of the Jedi. Producer Howard Kazanjian opposed to it, and so the film was called Revenge of the Jedi, until just before it got to the theaters and they went back to Return. Lucas has claimed it was always meant to be Return, and they used Revenge to throw off the ever-persistent media and rabid fans. That's partially true, as Lucas would have had it be Return from the start. However, Revenge was also a serious suggestion by Lucas, according to Kazanjian and other internal company documents, because it was decided Return was a weak title, not because of the media. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle. But given how often I've seen Lucas change his views on the history of his works, you can understand why I take some of his more modern interviews with a grain of salt. So don't be surprised if my rather oversimplification of the production history leaves out some of what you might think are important facts. This is not meant to be the definitive final word on this film's history or the film itself. I'm only presenting the parts of the story that will be relevant to my critique. If you are interested in a fuller version of these events, check out great documentaries like Empire of Dreams or A Hero's Journey by S.F. Debris, or pick up the exhaustingly comprehensive book by the late J.W. Rinsler. George Lucas grew up watching adventure serials as a child, and after he got started in independent filmmaking with his friend Francis Ford Coppola, he started pursuing his wish to make a tribute to those stories that inspired him. He had two strong ideas. The first was an epic space opera couched in mysticism, royalty, and evil empires. The second was an archaeologist who sought after supernatural artifacts with lots of action and romance. Lucas got far enough along in developing the space idea that it took priority. He wrote an epic story as a single film, ambitious in scope and filled with nods to westerns, ancient myths, and samurai films. After spending time revising the piece to be more manageable to produce, Lucas took the treatment to United Artists and Universal, both of which he had had prior experience with. They both passed on it, claiming not to understand it. He then took the treatment to Alan Ladd Jr., who was seeking new talent for 20th Century Fox. Ladd also didn't fully understand the treatment, but he had seen a print of American Graffiti, Lucas's newest film, and loved it. So he decided to take a chance here. That didn't mean Lucas was off to the races yet. He hired Ralph McQuarrie to illustrate some concept art for the film to help sell it to executives, who often scratched their heads at Lucas's explanations. He had to create several companies to help make the film, including Industrial Light and Magic, who were to handle the crucial effects. He hired Ben Burtt, a recent graduate from USC, who spent the next 2 years working on the film's sound. He had to shoot much of the film on location in Northern Africa and in the studios of England, each presenting their own problems. Instead of going with known actors, he hired relative unknowns for the leads based on how they performed together. And he often had to compromise his vision for budgetary reasons or to adhere to the shooting schedule. When he finished the shoot, he went right into post-production and discovered a few pile-ups waiting for him. ILM only had a few shots ready for review, and Lucas rejected them all, resulting in about a year's worth of work failing to produce any usable footage. As far as the editing was concerned, Lucas and his original choice clashed enough that the editor was fired, and Lucas had to edit the film himself until he could hire Paul Hirsch, Richard Chew, and even his wife Marcia. Rising costs as well as production delays meant that the film was in serious danger of being shut down. The movie also attracted little attention from cinemas, with fewer than 40 theaters agreeing to play it. When Lucas played a rough cut for his friends, only Steven Spielberg was enthusiastic about the film. Lucas even suffered hypertension and severe enough stress to check himself into a local hospital. Everything seemed to be working against Lucas and his space opera. It seemed the only two positive experiences were when the Fox executives were blown away by a rough cut they saw, and when Lucas attended the scoring sessions in London with John Williams to listen to the finished score. Nobody was prepared for what would happen on May 25, 1977. There were no early press reviews, little advertisement, and Lucas himself spent the day working on the foreign prints of the film and forgot it was even opening. But the movie became an overwhelming smash hit beyond anyone's dreams. Almost overnight, it became the thing to do that summer. The good word of mouth prompted lines around the block. Kids would go back multiple times. The film broke house records for almost each of the theaters that played it. It surpassed the previous king of the box office, Jaws, within 6 months of release. Some theaters continued to play it for over a year after its release. And when adjusted for inflation, it is currently both the second highest grossing film of all time domestically and the fourth highest worldwide. Not bad for a picture virtually nobody believed in. Escaping from the costly assault on Scarif, Princess Leia Organa reaches the skies of Tatooine before Darth Vader catches up. In a desperate move, she takes the data disk with the technical schematics for the Death Star, places them in R2-D2, and sends him and 3PO down to the planet to find Obi-Wan Kenobi, the reclusive Jedi general from the Clone Wars who now goes by the name of Ben. The droids are picked up by scavengers and are sold to Owen Lars, who takes care of the young Luke Skywalker. R2 sets off on his own to find Kenobi, and Luke catches up with him with the help of 3PO. The three are then attacked by native creatures, but are saved by Kenobi, who's been watching over Luke. He reveals to Luke some of his past and why he needs Skywalker's help to return the Death Star plans to the Rebellion. Luke refuses, citing domestic concerns, but when he returns to his uncle's farm, he discovers Imperial agents have set the place on fire and killed his aunt and uncle. With no ties left to the planet, Luke agrees to join Obi-Wan on his quest. They travel to the spaceport of Mos Eisley with the droids, avoiding Imperial patrols, and hire a local smuggler to take them off-world to Alderaan, Leia's homeworld. Little do they know that the Empire is one step ahead of them and have destroyed Alderaan with the Death Star. With no clue where to go next, they are captured and must find a way to escape with the imprisoned Leia, return the plans to another hidden rebel base, and find some way to stop this doomsday weapon before the Empire secures total control over the galaxy. A New Hope is extraordinarily simple and effective. It knows exactly how to pace itself, give you just enough information to get the ideas behind its universe without concerning itself with explaining everything, has earnest performances that all fit their characters, features perhaps the greatest film music ever created, and is a genuine crowd pleaser. Of course, I've met people who don't like this film. You can't win over 100% of the people all the time, but I can't recall a film that so thoroughly won people over enough to be this invested in its universe. Since I saw this film when I was about 4 or 5, I feel like I practically memorized it. I think one of the keys to its success is its masterful grasp of old stories and tropes. There's nothing inherently original about the basic skeleton of the film or its players. Luke is a fairly generic coming-of-age farm boy who discovers he can be more. Han is the dashing underworld representative that is moved to become a nobler character by Luke's example. Leia is the damsel in need of rescuing. Vader is the monster that represents the execution branch of the all-powerful ruler in the shadows. Obi-Wan represents the older generation who still believes in the mystical ways of the universe and imparts some of his knowledge to the youth. You wouldn't have to change much to make this into a retelling of the legend of King Arthur, Robin Hood, David and Goliath, or the first part of Beowulf's story. Of course, Lucas was very aware of this. When writing the script, his ambition was shining through with grandiose ideas and a complicated mythology. I've read most of the original treatments, and it can be borderline a complete mess with flashes of inspiration. I'd recommend reading the comic The Star Wars by J.W. Rinsler to get a sense of this. George was grasping at the pieces but didn't necessarily fully understand what he was doing with them, so he sought out further inspiration, and the noted scholar Joseph Campbell was a great help in his theory of the monomyth. The idea is that so many myths and legends share commonalities like with characters, themes, and stories. Campbell was trying to understand why this was and what it said of storytelling's impact on a culture. Other writers have caught on to this as well. Look at the similarities between this film and Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or Siegel and Schuster's Superman origin. Later works like Harry Potter, The Matrix, and Aragon highly resemble A New Hope's basic formula. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can retell this story 1,000 times more and it will hold its inherent power. The trick now is to present the hero's journey in an engaging way. The story doesn't need to be the most original, though creating your own universe and characters helps immensely. The author just needs to understand what they're doing and play to the tale's strengths. Luke's idealism and thirst for adventure is something we can all relate to. At some point in our lives, we've yearned for the promise of adventure, the excitement on the horizon, and perhaps a dash of humor and romance baked in. The core of the film's optimism is that this sense of hope is perhaps our greatest strength as a species. It inspires Han to put aside his self-centeredness and fight for something more. It would later ignite the spark that would light the fire that would destroy Darth Vader and reveal the good man that was Anakin Skywalker. And ultimately, these heroes' examples would inspire a new generation to finish the fight against the resurgent Emperor and his final attempt to seize control of the galaxy. That hope will be tested, tried, and sometimes lost for a moment, but it never dies. It cannot, because it is what carries us through the night into tomorrow. Luke's victory causes so much of us to jump for joy because we've all felt or yearned for that outcome at some point. It makes the original Star Wars one of the ultimate feel-good movies and ever relatable. Lucas presents this story in a lived-in future, where everything feels old and is tangible evidence of the long history. He's also making use of the camera in very unflashy ways, almost like a documentary crew would chronicle events. This documentarian, almost mundane approach extends itself to introducing this new universe to us. Nothing is really explained in dialogue unless it can't be communicated through visuals, like with the Force or how to blow up the Death Star. And even then, it's done in as natural a way as possible so you don't have characters weirdly belaboring the point to someone who should know some of this already. This makes this film serve as perhaps the best introduction into the Star Wars franchise. There are those who may argue you should start with the current chronological beginning of the films, Episode 1. However, one of my problems with starting people there is that film often builds upon our previous knowledge of the series to draw further significance to the events. In other words, Anakin and Obi-Wan's meeting, Qui-Gon's slight hand-waving at Boss Nass, and the hint at Anakin's darkness won't mean much unless you already have prior knowledge of the universe or someone outside the film can explain it to you. Plus, it doesn't give a good enough explanation for what the Jedi are, what the Force is, their relationship to it, and why others don't use it. The Phantom Menace doesn't establish its universe well enough for uninformed newcomers. A New Hope fulfills these needs well, and even though it was designed as an in medias res device, enough is given about the setup and the backstory that you aren't lost even if you know you are starting in the middle of the story. Mark Hamill's guiding principle for the role of Luke was sincerity, which is appropriate for a callow youth. He is untried and untested, so of course he encounters everything as a matter of fact because he comes with no preconceptions. Whereas Han has had to fight for everything in his life, and his arrogance is based on something substantial, even if a lot of it is due to luck. He has so much history behind him, whereas Luke has yet to start building his history. Hence the natural clash between Han and Luke. They aren't enemies, but rather unlikely allies who team up by necessity. At first, it seems like Han has exactly what the group needs to get them out of the Death Star. Trouble is, he's a little too reliant on simple tricks and nonsense. So the seeming damsel in distress ends up mostly rescuing herself, and it's a great role reversal. Needless to say, all three, Mark, Harrison, and Carrie, embody their roles so well that each has become a standard to be judged against. None of them are exactly delivering Oscar-worthy performances, but there's a sense of veracity to each that's hard to dismiss. The Shakespearean caliber acting, not surprisingly, belongs to Sir Alec Guinness. This is not just me talking. He's the only performer of the entire franchise so far that was nominated for an Oscar playing their role. Obi-Wan Kenobi is held as a standard for wise old mentors, and that's because he's everything we think of from this archetype. He's reflective, kind, savvy, leaps into action only when necessary, and always has the larger picture in mind. He knows his time is nearly done, and he doesn't hesitate to sacrifice himself to give the rest a chance to flee. This moment, by the way, is one of the most heroic of the film, and I'm sad to see people get hung up on whether it was necessary or not. I do love Ewan McGregor's performance of the character in the prequels, particularly Episode 3, but he freely admits he was channeling Sir Alec Guinness, and having such a springboard to work off from, it's no surprise he's a lot of people's favorite character from those films, myself included. But the foundation was laid by Alec, and while I'm sad to hear he had very mixed feelings overall about the part, his professionalism and talent shines through. Darth Vader is only in the film for about 10 minutes, but thanks in part to Obi-Wan's speech about his backstory, the combination of James Earl Jones' voice mixed with David Prowse's physicality, and a couple of awesome small displays of power, he transcends the screen to become an icon. Even before the deep dive we got of him in the prequels, he was the face of the franchise and everybody knows his name in that mask. I've even seen some people misremembering this film as containing later things related to Vader that it doesn't. For example, the name Anakin doesn't appear in dialogue until Episode 6, which was released a full 6 years after this film. And the amazing Imperial March is absent from the film entirely, as it was not introduced until Episode 5. That's how much he stays with us. We tend to think of him as a bigger deal in the original film than he was, and his survival is really the sole on-screen bit that suggests we'll be seeing sequels. I also don't want to leave out Governor Tarkin, played with icy menace by a fabulous Peter Cushing. He and Alec Guinness were really the only known movie stars at the time this film came out, and I've loved Cushing in everything I've seen him in. Unlike Alec, Peter enjoyed his time in association with the film immensely, and he expressed regret that he wouldn't be back for more films. If only he knew. The design and chemical makeup of this film is top-notch. Since this is a space fantasy instead of pure science fiction, the filmmakers aren't concerned with having logical explanations for much of the craft, the weapons, or the Force. But we believe it because it's simple and it seems to follow an internal logic. The Force is only given a sentence or two of explanation, yet it's all we need. We're not told in dialogue what powers the lightsaber or what it can do, but we get the idea through the visuals. We don't really question how these ships can travel faster than light, but because it's set in another galaxy and it's clear these civilizations are unrelated to Earth, we accept the lack of explanation as part of the fantasy. The costume design is simple and aesthetic. However, it both uses and breaks from established principles like color theory to suit its purposes. We understand that blue lightsabers are for the good guys and red ones are for the bad guys. Yet both Luke and Leia wear the same white as the stormtroopers, whereas their leader Vader wears almost all black. We have a lot of earth tones to start the movie with, giving us a planet that is visually and thematically distinct from the gray and sleek Death Star. This contrast contributes to a wider thematic goal of the franchise, nature over technology. The Rebels use necessary technology, But it's only when Luke relies on his spiritual side, which is a more human and fallible quality than technical expertise, and Han chooses to fight for a nobler cause, that the day is won. And that theme keeps coming back. You have it in Episode 6 with the Ewoks, you have it in Episode 1 with the Gungans, and you have it in Episode 9 with the civilian fleet on Exegol. It's perhaps no shock that this became an apparent motif, given that Lucas was very influenced by the politics and civilian response in America during the Vietnam War. You can plainly see this in the prequels with the rise of Palpatine, and in the film he almost directed, Apocalypse Now. But I bring it up to demonstrate how in sync each department was to George's vision. The sound is also a good example of this. Ben Burtt uses mostly organic and real sounds throughout, relying on a synthesizer only really for R2, and even that was mixed with recordings of baby talk. He composed the sounds of natural elements rather than digitally creating them, and this idea has persisted in all the subsequent films and shows. Speaking of composing, is it a mystery to how I feel about John Williams' score? It's the #1 ranked movie score with the general populace and organizations like the American Film Institute for a reason. His brilliant use of orchestral music in a theatrical way lends itself to various recognizable motifs that color the music for every project afterwards. It's based a lot on emotion rather than something rigid that governs the use of the themes. Ever notice that the Force theme's first appearance is in Leia's first scene? Leia's theme is what plays over the aftermath of Obi-Wan's death. The main theme, often used in the narrative as the music over a good versus evil battle, like in Episode 1, doubles as Luke's theme this time out. You can draw interesting theories about these instances using later media, but these obviously weren't in place at the time, and I doubt Lucas had that much forethought, which is a notion I'll examine in my next Star Wars review. If I were looking for strict consistency of musical themes use to character appearance, I would be bothered. However, none of it feels wrong or out of place, and that's what's most important. Support the film and the emotional journey rather than relying on a calculated formula. This soundtrack, along with the 8 other symphonies Williams has managed to compose for the series, is rivaled only by Howard Shore's score for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for me, as the greatest collection of film music of all time, and it will no doubt continue to stand the test of time. Is there anything I don't like about this film? Not much, but I do have a few criticisms. The most glaring one is the special edition changes. Hold on to your butts, I'm sure this is the first time anyone has ever complained about the special edition changes. For the most part, I'm not against the idea, and I even like some of the new additions, such as the redone shots for the Yavin battle, the additional legions of the Stormtroopers for the Han gag on the Death Star, and the additional scene with Biggs that strengthens a connection that was almost impossible to glean from the original version. However, there are plenty of unnecessary changes that have happened over the years, such as the rocks in front of R2, the extra creatures to Mos Eisley, and the removal of the Wolfman in the cantina. I'm not even going to go into the Greedo scene, except that I've heard a version of the story that change was not Lucas's idea, but rather a request from the MPAA. But who knows? When submitted for approval originally in 1977, the response was 50% for G and 50% for PG, and PG eventually won out. No, my biggest sore spots are the Jabba scene and the permanency of the special edition. The walking over the tail is cringeworthy, sure, but my bigger issue is that this scene adds nothing to the story or characters. We already know Han has a price on his head. All the important information about him was transferred to the Greedo scene when this was originally cut. And it actually spoils the later reveal of the Falcon to us. Luke's line about a piece of junk is a lot funnier if you haven't seen the Falcon yet. As cool as it is to see Jabba this early in the trilogy, I'd rather not have the scene in the film at all. Beyond all the individual changes, I think fans are most justifiably upset about not having the original versions preserved and released to the public in pristine format. You either have to rely on high-quality fan projects or stick to the low-quality VHS tapes or the poor Laserdisc transfer that was done for only one DVD release. This is ridiculous to me. This has nothing to do with which edition of the film you like more or which is the true in-universe version. It's a matter of preserving film history. This movie was awarded an Oscar in 7 categories, including visual effects, sound design, editing, and music. Too bad you don't have an official high-quality option to see what won the film those awards. A number of the original visual effects in the Battle of Yavin are replaced with 20-year later footage. Certain sounds like the original Obi-Wan scream are gone. Some scenes like the entrance to Mos Eisley and the stormtrooper search at the escape pod are lengthened, disrupting the pace. And music for Episode 6 was reused for the Jabba scene. I get why Lucasfilm prefers to consider the newer releases as canon, and I agree. But consider how many other films have had different versions released, like Blade Runner and Kingdom of Heaven, and you can watch whichever version you prefer. Frankly, I see no justifiable reason to keep these out of the public's hands. And given the recent screening of the unaltered original version of Episode 4 in England for the BFI Festival earlier this year, I'd say Lucasfilm is sitting on a gold mine if they ever decided to go through the restoration process on this trilogy. My second and final observation has little to do with the film itself. Rather, it has to do with the wider universe and the legacy this film has created, doubling back on itself and hindering a viewing experience. And this is more of a personal experience rather than a true criticism. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate how later projects helped to enhance this film, like how Revenge of the Sith shows us how important the children's safety is until the proper time, how Andor demonstrates how evil the Empire really is, how dangerous opposing it is, and the complexity of the rebellion's fight. Or how Rogue One demonstrates how heavy a price was paid for a shot-in-the-dark chance to take this monstrosity of a space station down. That said, there's an overabundance of explanations for trivial things or references within the universe that makes it hard to appreciate the film on its own, which I try to do as much as possible when I review things. For example, the officers not shooting at the escape pod was never something I felt needed elaboration, but there are now stories dedicated as to why they didn't, and it wasn't due to budgetary concerns. R5 now isn't a chance explosion demonstrating that the Jawas are cheapskates, it's now self-sabotage on purpose so R2 can stay with 3PO and accomplish his mission. The droids not being allowed into the bar is due to the bartender's hatred of droids when growing up during the Clone Wars. Greedo now has a personal beef with Han versus his original motive of just collecting on the bounty. And these are all from the book from a certain point of view. That's to say nothing about what later shows, films, and video games have done, such as demonstrating the symmetry of Anakin and Luke to the point where they grew up on the same planet and have the same skill set, or showing why the Falcon has no escape pods in Solo. I get why this happened. When something like this becomes beloved and inspirational, our emotions get the better of us, and we make certain things out to be more significant than they are by adding in layers, or by expanding certain moments in order to satisfy our daydreams for more adventures. This isn't inherently a bad thing, and Lord knows I'm guilty of it too. But there does come a point when our desire to add becomes too much, and it threatens to undermine the original work and turn it into something it's not. A key example would be the lightsaber fight between Vader and Obi-Wan. Many fans are now trying to reconcile it with more visually spectacular fights in the rest of the franchise, rather than just accepting it as something created at a different point in time, uninformed by the later works, or the practical reason, dealing with the physical deficiencies of the props themselves, which necessitates a slower fight. As much as I and a lot of fans are to blame for this issue, I place an equal share of responsibility on Lucasfilm, both during and after George's departure. Simply put, it's hard to watch the film as it was originally presented because my mind keeps wandering to other projects that tie so heavily into it. This is the main reason it's taken me so long to get around to reviewing this film, because I wasn't sure how to review this film specifically and not spend the whole time going off on tangents that touch on everything that goes through my mind when I watch it. Hopefully, you have a purer viewing experience than I do. This wider legacy interferes with my ability to answer the question, does A New Hope hold up? I can't answer that, because it's influenced so much and has been ever present in most of our lives that it's not really been gone long enough to appreciate how timeless the film is or isn't. The original Star Wars has become a mainstay for a lot of folks, and judging by its almost 50 years of life and the legions of fans it continues to inspire, I'd say it's earned a permanent place in film history. When viewing it for the first time, A New Hope is a simple little film with no grand ambitions. But ask anyone who grew up with it, and they will tell you it means so much more to them. While I do think we've managed to score higher in this franchise in terms of execution and quality, there's no denying the power of this template. Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope is one of the most potent films in the history of cinema, and whatever else comes from this franchise or becomes of us as a society will always have the simpler times on the barren sands of a planet that's farthest from the bright center of the universe.